Okay, well, welcome everybody. We are about to begin tonight's backyard forestry presentation, which consists of a brief presentation on farmland assessment, and then we'll transition over to a kind of a giant Q&A with Andrew Bennett and Jeremy Caggiano. Jeremy is a regional forester for the New Jersey Forest Service, and Andy is a New Jersey approved forester and an NRCS approved service provider. So I will begin with that presentation, and then we'll move to Q&A. When we've received a number of questions during registration, but we also understand that many of you like to post questions during the webinar, so please post them in the chat, and we'll all be monitoring them. And once we shift over to the Q&A session, we'll try to go through as many as we can and answer in a way that satisfies everyone in the audience. So you may have secondary questions that come after that, and just please ask them, and we'll do our best to get you responses. So that being the case, I'm going to share my screen, and Andy, you'll tell me if I'm all good. Good now? You're good. Yep. Okay. Well, we've already introduced you and Jeremy. Well, let's introduce the NJFA. We're a 501c3 organization. We advocate for all forests in New Jersey by supporting responsible, sustainable use and science-based forest management, benefiting the forest ecosystem and all dependent communities. Since we'll be answering a lot of questions tonight, I'd like to read this disclaimer to you. This presentation is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to constitute specific legal, tax, or similar advice. No claims, promises, or guarantees are made about the accuracy, completeness, adequacy, or suitability of its contents. We encourage landowners to consult with their own attorneys, accountants, and foresters for professional advice concerning their woodlands and otherwise. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to educate woodland owners and the public on Farmland Assessment of Woodlands, its purposes, requirements, and conservation results, and provide a Q&A session with two experienced foresters. Let's talk a little bit about New Jersey and its forests. New Jersey, you hear it almost every day. It's the most densely populated state, but most people don't know that it's 40% forested, which is about 2 million acres. Half of those forests, roughly half, are privately owned, half are publicly owned. There are about 400,000 forested acres in the FLA program, the Farmland Assessment Program. Publicly owned forests, about 1 million acres, are in a state of neglect and present significant wildfire risk, primarily due to very limited budgets and staffing and opposition to needed management. In contrast, the hundreds of thousands of acres of private woodlands in the Farmland Assessment Program are actually managed under woodland management or forest stewardship plans, and I underline these last 4 words, at their own expense. Let's talk a little bit about risks. Wildfire risk. The last couple of years, we've been keeping our eye on that very closely. These fires start and spread quite quickly. 2025, we're up to 23,000 acres burned so far this year. In 2024, there were 13,000 acres burned. By the way, the peak year for forest fires was in the mid-20th century when over 200,000 acres burned in 1 year. Pests, diseases, and invasives. Another interesting stat, 48 million ash trees died in the last few years due to the emerald ash borer. And I did a little math on that and a little research, and the 48 million can be divided pretty evenly between forests and urban suburban. So 24 million are in forests. And if we use the ratio of 400,000 acres to a million of private lands to 1 million acres of public lands, and we do a little math, we can estimate that 5 million ash trees died on the lands of private landowners enrolled in the program. But there is no funding for them to remove that. They need to do that themselves. Numerous other pests and species-specific diseases have invaded our forests, along with plants, forest invasives on the forest floor. Our forests have a lack of diversity and resilience and a lack of habitats. Going back to the history of farmland assessment, in the mid-20th century, New Jersey was losing about 60,000 acres annually to development. A constitutional amendment was proposed to create farmland assessment, and 71% of the state voted yes on that amendment. And the Farmland Assessment Act was passed in 1964. After that, there's a kind of a cascading series of events: the Pinelands Protection Act in 79, Farmland Assessment amended in 86 to redefine, some people say refine, woodland criteria, Highlands Water Protection and Planning Act 2004, New Jersey Forest Stewardship Act of 2010, keep your eye on that date for a second, changing gross revenue requirements in 2015. Agricultural was increased from 500 to 1,000. The woodlands were held at the 500 level, at the current level, to prevent unnecessary tree cutting and in recognition of the very low forest land productivity values. And we'll talk a little bit later about what land productivity values are and how they're determined. The Division of Taxation created something called the Mixed Use Memo in 2015. That means if your land is part ag and part forest, how many acres and which standard do you have to meet? Do you have to meet the $1,000 standard, the $500 standard? Is it a combined standard? And Jeremy and Andy can talk a lot better about that than I can. The New Jersey Forest Stewardship Regulations, remember I asked you to keep track of that 2010 date, were actually issued in 2017, and that's when the program went live. Now let's look at what's happened since farmland assessment was created. Back in the mid-20th century, they were losing acreage in the plus 200,000 range over a period of 5 years. And then that was reduced by about half once FLA came into existence. But then subsequently, forest land losses began to increase in the early 2000s. And current studies are revealing that forest land losses today, to the extent they're continuing, are due to development. And I break that into two categories: residential and what I call commercial warehousing, and we'll talk about those in a moment or two. So just to describe how I view these programs, Farmland Assessment of Woodlands is a forest conservation program. It's intended to reduce the loss of forests to development and encourage landowner management of their woodlands. Farmland Assessment of Agricultural, Horticultural lands is a farm conservation program that encourages the use of land for farming and related activities to reduce the loss of farmland to development. Now, here's a critical concept which some people simply do not understand. Farmland assessment does not apply to a home, buildings, the home site, all of which are fully taxed as any other properties in a taxing district. The forest and agricultural lands which are enrolled in the program are assessed on what is called productivity value, and that is determined annually by the State Farmland Evaluation Committee, which issues an annual report. You can search that on Google, and you can actually see a listing of all their reports and look at any year. There's a current report on that website, and it breaks down the value of land based on its productivity capacity. It does it by county, by land type, forest, agricultural, and other types, and also in certain categories by land quality. And so it's a very interesting report to read. It's not particularly long, and you could immediately see what the production capacity of particular lands are in particular counties. Farmland Assessment of Woodlands was specifically addressed in '86, as we said earlier. Today, woodlands are subject to the general requirements for agriculture, plus special additional requirements for woodlands, including minimum 5 acres of woodlands, not including the home site, 2 years active devotion to the application for farmland assessment. So prior to the application, you must have committed active devotion to the property, consistent with what you will be doing in your management plan. The Woodland Management Plan or Forest Stewardship Plan, there are two types of plans, which we'll discuss in a moment. They're 10-year plans. You have to have one, and it has to be prepared by a New Jersey approved forester. And that plan is then reviewed by the New Jersey Forest Service. You have to comply with a minimum annual gross sales if you have a woodland management plan. You must follow your plan, and you must do annual filings. The annual filings are In addition to what people do for agriculture, which are filed with the local tax assessor, owners of woodland properties must file the same set of applications with the New Jersey Forest Service. That's the FA1, the application for farmland assessment, the supplemental gross sales form, the woodland data form, which reports your activities, and that form is reviewed and certified by a New Jersey approved forester before it is filed with the New Jersey Forest Service, and a map showing activities conducted. In addition to the New Jersey Forest Service reviewing all of those filings, it also conducts inspections. So properties are subject to on-site inspections by both the local tax assessor and the New Jersey Forest Service. And when it comes to the New Jersey Forest Service, that's typically at 3-year intervals. I believe Jeremy will be able to be more particular about how that works. And there are also other inspections involved in connection with forest stewardship plans. Rollback taxes. Rollback taxes are a penalty which is incurred by the landowner if a parcel is taken out of farmland assessment. That is, there is a change of use. And the rollback taxes, I say there are 3 years of rollback taxes, but the way it's written, it's 2 years of back taxes plus the current previous year, plus the current year. So that it's 3 years of taxes at the full rate as opposed to the farmland assess rate. Now, if you tuned into this webinar to hear about pending legislation, and I saw there were a number of questions in the registrations about this, tonight I'm going to speak about one piece of legislation, and that's A4875 S3446. Those are the Assembly and Senate numbers of the same bill, and there is an original version and a proposed amended version. You have to pay a little bit close attention to that. If you look on the website of the Assembly or the Senate, you will find the original version, and that proposed to create a Farmland Assessment Review Commission. Now, while we had previously objected to that for other reasons, there is a proposed amended version which is not available on the website. That version would, among other changes to the Farmland Assessment Act, triple the minimum gross revenue for woodlands from $500 to $1,500. And for agricultural lands, the level would go from $1,000 to $3,000. It would also impose a $150 fee to file the annual application for farmland assessment. It would modify the function and makeup of the State Farmland Evaluation Committee, and it would authorize other modifications to the program. We feel that A4875 S3446 presents real concerns for our forests and farms. For decades, New Jersey has encouraged the private ownership, conservation, and management of forest and agricultural properties. For those with woodland management plans, this bill would require the cutting of more trees just to satisfy an illusory higher minimum gross revenue level. Smaller properties will be unable to reach this level of production. Just take a look at the State Farmland Evaluation Committee report, and you will see what the productivity level is for woodlands. Many others will not be able to sustain this level of production over time. So if, let's say, it's a 10-acre forest, maybe the first year they can reach that 1,500, but will they be able to do it for successive years? This will drive unnecessary tree cutting, thousands of acres out of the program, and potentially into development or neglect. Those who are unable to meet the higher minimum gross sales, but want to remain in the program, will have to pursue the stewardship option, and they will be required to prepare and file new plans at significant expense or take their woodlands out of the program. Similarly, small agricultural properties, many of which are sellers at farmers markets throughout the state or local farm stands, producing lower value crops such as hay or leased by larger farm operations, will be forced out of the program and into development or neglect. Now, I made a special note about mixed-use properties because I'm particularly concerned about them. Because depending upon the size of your forest and agricultural components, you may find portions of your property unable to qualify, or you may need to produce a higher level of production than you did exclusively for woodlands. For example, if you have a modest hayfield of 6 acres and a woodland of 6 acres, you may need to meet the agricultural minimum gross revenue, which may be virtually impossible for you. And I'm sure the foresters will be discussing responses to many of the questions that were asked about this. So I expressed these concerns in 4 questions. Why would legislators who are concerned about conserving forests want to force woodland owners who are already complying with the program's many requirements to cut more trees just to achieve an arbitrary increased minimum gross sales requirement? I also point out that's completely contrary to the goals of stewardship, which was created so that less trees would be cut to prevent unnecessary cutting. Why would legislators who are concerned about conserving forests want to force woodland owners out of the program and their woodlands into development? Why would legislators who are concerned about wildfire risk want to force woodland owners out of the program and their woodlands into neglect? Why would legislators who are concerned about the loss of farmland to development force smaller properties out of the program by requiring that they produce higher levels of productivity than reasonably expected? I think these are all fair questions to ask. So let's go back to farmland assessment and the program, and now we'll discuss its societal benefits. Woodlands are conserved and managed. Forest agricultural land losses are slowed. There's enhanced wildlife management. Clean air, clean water, that's a big subject, only 4 words. Minimal towns and school services. Residential development slowed and warehousing development slowed. Just touch on the last 3. Farms and forest lands don't require water and sewer. They don't require snow plowing, all of those things. The land has basically 0 cost to the town. Residential development slowed. Why do I mention this? Because if you build a house, let's keep it simple, a modest home where the taxes are $15,000 on what was formerly farmland, those $15,000, well, that's, you're saying $15,000 in taxes. That's really great. Except that if that house has 1 student in the school system, the cost will go up to the school system between $20,000 and $24,000 based upon the reported numbers for the various school systems around the state of New Jersey. If there's 2 children in the house, the cost will go up by close to $40,000. And warehousing, well, we all know what the objections to warehousing have been throughout the state, and we're certainly getting a lot of overbuilding of warehouses right now, but the concerns are obvious. So let's talk a little bit about who are forest landowners. Turns out forest landowners are largely a senior demographic. And when I say a senior demographic, it's a very senior demographic. The average age of woodland owner is 65 plus, with 25% over 75. That's a high number. In sharp contrast, only 17.4% of New Jersey residents are over 65. 7.4% are over 75, and the median age is 40. What are the management plan types? I mentioned them earlier. The foresters will be going into this, but there's a woodland management plan, which has a minimum gross sales requirement, and a New Jersey Forest Stewardship Plan, which has no minimum gross sales requirement. This little chart sort of compares the 2, but the main differences being the gross revenue requirement and slightly different record keeping and monitoring for forest stewardship. And again, I defer to the foresters for their detailed responses on this. Well, what are the qualifying products on your woodlands? Typically firewood, timber, and you'll notice some careful language in here. Maple sap, you might think maple syrup, there's maple sap for a reason. Mushrooms, intentionally managed, and unfinished wood products. And the point of this is a distinction between finished wood products and maple sap turned into maple syrup, and what value you can use on your gross sales form. And again, that will be discussed in detail after this presentation. What is an approved consulting forester? Well, what are the requirements, first of all? Has to be SAF, Society of American Foresters, accredited 4-year degree or a graduate degree approved by the NJDEP. 2 years of forest management experience. They must abide by the SAF Code of Ethics, and they must submit their accomplishments to the New Jersey Forest Service to obtain their approval. What's their role? They prepare plans. They attest annually that the plan is being followed. That's a signature on the woodland data form that the landowner signs, and then that's certified by the forester. They report semi-annually certain data sets to the New Jersey DEP. They provide woodland management expertise, and you can find a list of New Jersey approved foresters on the NJDEP website. What's the role of the Forest Service? Plan review. That's your initial plan, any succeeding plans, and any amendments to your plans. Annual application review. Again, it's the WD1, the FA1, the FA1GS, the activity map, which must be submitted each year by August 1st. And they're also submitted, if you're a forest landowner, to the tax assessor. And they perform inspections. And speaking of inspections, they're typically every 3 years to confirm compliance with the plan, verification of annual applications, and they will notify the assessor of noncompliance. Also, there's a New Jersey stewardship application inspection and ongoing inspections that are slightly different. What's the role of the local tax assessor? Well, every year you get that envelope in the mail that provides you with applications and forms. They review annual applications, as does the Forest Service. They inspect farmland assessed properties. They approve or deny annual applications. They review requirements with applicants, and they also do New Jersey stewardship application inspections. What's the role of the landowner? Well, in my view, the landowner places forest sustainability over economic gain by choosing to steward their land rather than gain through development of their land. They commit to the active devotion requirement, and that's 2 years in advance of any tax year. They must be actively devoted. They invest capital, time, and labor in the plan, equipment, services, woodlands, and their management. And it's a lot of money. It's not simply saying, oh, I made a little bit of firewood. The average farm tractor with attachments, you're talking $35,000 out of the box. And then there are so many components of equipment that you need to have in order to properly manage your property. Also, if you use outside services, it's almost prohibitively expensive. So we get back to the landowner. You follow your plan. You comply with the more stringent requirements of the Farmland Assessment of Woodlands program. So summary. Farmland Assessment of Woodlands is the most successful forest conservation program in New Jersey. It's an alternative to more lucrative development, but it takes commitment of a landowner. It supports healthy, resilient forests and wildlife habitats. It reduces unnecessary tree cutting. It reduces neglect and wildfire risk. And all of the above are placed at risk by that bill that we discussed. Farmland Assessment of Agriculture and Mixed-Use Farm Properties, and particularly the smaller ones, provides an alternative to more lucrative development, also at risk under A4875 S3446. Owning a farmland assessed woodland is capital, labor, and time intensive for owners. We can go into more detail on that during the Q&A. And enrolled forest properties have significant multi-level oversight by the New Jersey Forest Service, the tax assessor, and the approved forester. So in summary, if you want to enter the program, you should retain an approved consulting forester, prepare a woodland management plan or forest stewardship plan. You must be actively devoted to the land for 2 years prior to filing. You must follow your plan, document your activities, and make all required annual filings. And now, without further ado, Q&A with Jeremy and Andy.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate that. So I think what we're going to do, we have this list of questions that folks submitted as they were signing up over the last week or so. And then again, feel free to drop questions in the chat, please. That would be helpful. So we'll kind of just go back and forth between our list that was submitted early and in the chat. So there's kind of some themes here that from questions that were submitted, one of which I think would be helpful for Jeremy and I to talk about is some of maybe Rich touched on this, but this whole forest stewardship, woodland management question, which one should I do? What's the difference? There was even a question of which option is easier for farmers or which option is easier for woodland owners, I would say. Is woodland management easier than stewardship? Is stewardship easier than woodland management? So I'll let Jeremy kick off a little bit and just maybe talk a little bit about the differences and then maybe address that. Is it easier question? Which one's easier?
Yeah, sure. I think I could do that. Well, thank you guys. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Andy, for inviting me tonight. It's great to see you guys, and it's great to be with everybody on the call tonight. With regards to, which kind of plan should I choose question, I really think, and you're going to hate this answer, but it starts with it truly being an individualistic kind of decision that has to be made. There are benefits to the forest stewardship program, though, that I would like to kind of touch on. I do think the forest stewardship program opens woodland owners up to a lot of opportunity to kind of manage their forest for what the forest actually needs, not to necessarily focus on having to derive income. Now, that income aspect of it that's associated with the woodland management plan tends to be primarily focused on single use owners of property, right? But there are a lot of owners out there that have mixed uses, right? They have some traditional agriculture, they're growing some hay, they have some corn, they have some woodland, and maybe that split of woodland versus traditional agriculture is a little bit heavier on the agricultural side. Well, then they're kind of stuck having to derive income for the quote unquote property anyway. So really, from an income derivement standpoint, it doesn't make a tremendous difference because you're kind of stuck doing it anyhow. But if you're a landowner that is either heavy on woodland compared to traditional ag, or if you're right close to being split but have a little bit more ag than woodland, you could very easily, under the stewardship program, do something like afforestation, right? And you could slowly afforest a portion of that cropland harvested or other traditional agricultural property, and you could begin to plant trees there. And if you could prove that by the end of a 10-year forest stewardship plan, you could have about a 10% canopy, and we're not sticklers about this. We just mostly are focused on it truly being a forest, and you're showing that these trees are surviving that you plant. You could go that direction and have a forest stewardship plan and be out of the obligation of having to derive income. Other things under the stewardship program in the stewardship plan that I really like is that you could gear your forest management on so many different activities that are focused on non-income deriving activities. So we're not going after firewood and cutting it every year, but instead we're doing quality deer management, for instance, or we're doing another kind of wildlife habitat improvement project. We're going out and doing pre-commercial thinning. We're treating invasive species. We're even going out, and Andy's company with Ridge and Valley, I know this year they even went out with some private contractors and they treated invasive pests. So they went after spongy moths, like the old gypsy moths, doing BT applications with drones. So to me, under the stewardship program, the sky's the limit in terms of what you want to do in your forest. Now, only you know what exactly, and your consultant forester knows exactly what that forest truly needs. But instead of chasing firewood and instead of chasing income, you could truly focus your management activities on what your woodlands are begging and asking for. So, which one is better? It's really it's a personal difference. A stewardship plan you may find as you speak with your consultants, and I think Andy could speak to this a little bit more thoroughly and pointedly, is that I think a stewardship plan does take quite a bit more effort to develop, and therefore the cost is a little bit higher too. But again, yeah, it's truly, from my perspective, a personal choice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just say, so as a private consultant with quite a few landowners, the conversation we have pretty regular with folks is I kind of like talk about it like there's no long if you go into forest stewardship, there's no longer this kind of voice in this ear saying, how are you going to derive income? You need to derive $600, $800, whatever it is. So you're going to have to cut some firewood. You're going to have to sell some firewood. When we get into stewardship, that voice is now gone, and we can look at the forest kind of holistically. And as Jeremy described, we can start thinking through what makes sense in any given year, whether it be invasive species control or tree cutting. It doesn't prohibit tree cutting. It just means that maybe not what we do that particular year. And Jeremy brought up a great point. This year's a perfect example. We have landowners where we were expecting a bad infestation of spongy moth. So their activity this year, we did a quick plan revision, and their activity this year, if they were in a stewardship plan, their only activity was the investment they made in the contractor to come do an application of BT to reduce, hopefully, the population of spongy moth. So that technically, that can't be done in the woodland plan. In the woodland plan, they would have had to do the spongy moth control and still produce their firewood to meet their income requirement. So we pretty much, most of our customers, we drive them towards stewardship. We just think it's a better fit, gives us a lot more flexibility. So that's.
I think
was a good question.
stat wise, stewardship's somewhere between a quarter and a third of the current plans. And woodland management plans are about roughly two-thirds to three-quarters of the existing plans today. It certainly has been a growth in stewardship. Andy, could you jump in, or Jeremy, on the mixed use issue, and how does that play into your decision? How could that play into your decision?
Yeah, so I'll just say briefly. So the way that the taxation looks at a mixed use property is if your agriculture operation, so when I say more kind of traditional ag, so cropland, permanent pasture, if that exceeds more than 5 acres, so that exceeds 5 acres of your farming operation, you are now required to produce that minimum 1,000 and then some. If you're below 5 acres devoted to cropland or pasture, and the rest of it is in forest, so the majority is in forest, and your traditional ag is under 5, they are not going to, if you're in stewardship, you wouldn't have to show any income on your farmland application.
But if the ag crosses 5,
Yep.
and I just wanted to make it clear to people that
Yep.
stewardship is not a Superman suit against meeting revenue. If you
Yep.
have mixed use, you have to
Yep.
meet the revenue on the other type of property.
Correct. Yep. Yep, you nailed it. Couple quick questions just to knock out from the chat. Does switching from a woodland plan to stewardship plan trigger a new 2-year active devotion period? That's simple. That's a no. So you're still actively devoted to farming. You just need to have an active plan, whether that's a 10-year woodland plan or a 10-year stewardship plan. So always make sure your plan is current. So they have a 10-year duration to the month and stewardship plans to the day. Just make sure that stays current. There was another question about in the chat, but also on this list about grant money, cost share money, things like that. So there's really one opportunity for landowners to derive some help financially with their forestry activities, and that would be through the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is part of the USDA. So they have monies through the Farm Bill that they are disseminating to farmers. And that's not just an agriculture farmer, devoted to crops. That's also a forest landowner. So they have monies to help with the actual drafting and creation of the forestry plan, forest stewardship plan, and they have monies to help with the implementation of the plan. So you apply, you get ranked, it's no guarantee, but there's quite a few people that get approved for that. So this is not for equipment. They don't do a grant to buy a tractor, but they do a grant to do a project, which you could very well take some of that money they gave you to do the project, and you could spend it on helping to buy a tractor if you wanted to, but you're only getting this amount of money to accomplish that project, and you get the money when you accomplish the project, whether you bought a tractor or not. That's when you get your money. So,
and that money is typically cost share, correct, Andy?
Yeah, it's a reimbursement, and the amount is really agreed upon up front. So they have a catalog of practices with rates, and they say, hey, we'll pay this much per acre to help you control Japanese barberry with an herbicide. And
you will often find that your expenses will far exceed that reimbursement. So when you do it, you have to be prepared to front the money, and you have to be prepared for the fact that they are not going to reimburse you 100%.
Yep. It's usually, depending on the practice, it's a range, but I can usually confidently say that it's going to cover 50%. Sometimes it's as high as 70%, but that's a good ballpark for you, like 50 to 75%.
And that's why NRCS refers to that payment as an incentive payment, right? It incentivizes you to make that investment, knowing that you may get, a financial return if you do rank and go through the processes. The other thing, and it's somewhat of a sales pitch for forest stewardship, is that yes, NRCS will work with you and go through a process of like upgrading or augmenting a woodland management plan. But if you go the forest stewardship plan route, then you will, automatically qualify to potentially rank for funds for implementation. A stewardship plan will qualify you to pursue that further with NRCS. You don't have to change your plan type.
Let's see here. Here's a simple question for Jeremy. How often there are inspections? Rich mentioned that in his presentation. Jeremy, speak to the Forest Service inspections. How often and what does an inspection look like?
Right, right. Yeah, we definitely come out to your property. Whether you're mixed use or your property is entirely devoted to woodlands. If you're a brand new landowner coming into the program with a woodland management plan or a forest stewardship plan, once that plan is submitted to my agency in my office and we approve it, we like to give you a little bit of time, maybe a season or so, to get out and start doing your activities. But then usually we'll be out once in that first 3 years. And then after that initial inspection, we'll come back out again every 3 years. We'll do a site inspection. We primarily focus our inspection on three things. We make sure that your plan is still active. It hasn't expired. These plans, either one of them, they only last for 10 years, and then you have to get them basically redrawn up, and you get a re-inventory done of your forest by your forest consultant. When we do the inspection, we also make sure that at that time, I look at all of your applications that you're submitted for farmland assessment and make sure all of the applications and the language within especially the activities that you're proposing haven't been done, match what's prescribed in the woodland management or forest stewardship plan. But the main reason we go out is to make sure that the activity proposed in those plans actually matches what's happening on the ground. So yeah, we go out on average about once every 3 years. And if activities aren't being done as prescribed in the approved plan that you drew up with your consultant forester and that was approved by New Jersey Forest Service, there could be non-compliances and implications that come along with that, like a loss of farmland assessment, or a possibility of a break where you will have to go make up X amount of years of activity really rapidly. So we do take these field inspections very seriously.
There was a question on here and said if someone needs to stop their long-term forestry work, like ill health or advanced age, what is the rollback, or why is the rollback so penalizing? So Rich kind of hit this. My recommendation as a private consulting forester, I would tell my customers, go talk to the tax assessor early. Tax assessors, though there are written rules, you can have a conversation with the tax assessor and explain your situation. And they are a person with a heart. They will listen to your explanation of what's going on. And I have found them to be very gracious when it comes to a rollback. If somebody says, hey, I can't do this anymore, I can't maintain my forest, I can't, go ahead and have that conversation early. And they may ask you like, hey, could you continue doing your forestry activity, submit an application, show $0 on it, and I'll deny your application for a couple of years and we'll just let you kind of fall out of the program without a penalty. So
Well, yeah, Andy, some of this has to do with it actually is a change of use issue. And so that is it's a complicated legal issue
Yep.
as to whether ceasing to do the activity is a change of use that would trigger rollback.
Yep.
So it'd probably smart also maybe to talk to a land use attorney if you seriously consider it and you have a large piece of property in particular where you might be significantly impacted. But maintaining some consistency in the use is your point, Andy, I think, is what you're saying.
Yep.
And yes.
And overall, I stress to my customers, talk to your tax assessor, get to know your tax assessor. They kind of have the keys to the car. Like they're controlling, how much what you're paying in taxes. They're controlling how quickly you get into farm assessment. Again, active devotion for 2 years prior to the tax year when you roll in. I've had assessors say, well, you know what? You're like 18 months in, I'll let you in. Like they have some flexibility, but you got to talk to them. You got to build a relationship and they need to know you. So I encourage all landowners, go talk to the tax assessor. There was a question here. Can renting your woodlands for the purpose of deer hunting count towards income from the woodlands for farm assessment? I don't believe you can. To my knowledge, that doesn't count.
No, that wouldn't count. The income being derived off the woodland would have to be directly associated with the management of the woodland.
Yep.
It's an interesting question, Andy, and is there a public access component to forest stewardship?
Right. Right. Yeah. So.
No, I would say it's definitely not a mandatory thing. So the answer right out of the chute would be no. Public access is absolutely not a requirement. There are criteria within the stewardship rules associated with estate planning and things like that. And that's really, a lot of people get the misconception of that, meaning, estate planning equals pursuing an easement with green acres, and pursuing an easement with green acres means that you're going to allow public access. So no, that couldn't be any more untrue, that public access is a requirement. What we were trying to do with that criteria is to have people think about the fact that we are only temporary stewards of our woodland. And depending on your age, maybe it doesn't really matter what your age is. Really think about what's going to happen to your woodland if and when you do go. And if you care a lot about it remaining an open space, then what kind of measures have you taken to ensure that it does remain open, managed woodland in perpetuity?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of like ties to the question that we have here, Andy, about green acres too.
Mm-hmm.
I do think we had a question about resources available, and just generally a question about, how all of that works with woodland acquired by green acres.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the best way to answer that is twofold. A, direct people that had that question directly to the Green Acres program. There is a contact there named Kerry Wild. If you go online and you look up the Green Acres program and you find a phone number for them and you ask for Kerry Wild, she seems to be the main point of contact right now that I've been in touch with Green Acres. And resources available to help maintain open space. I would say every Green Acres easement I've ever seen has a slightly different easement or contract itself, right? So really, whoever's asking that question is interested in a specific property and potentially helping with management of it, get your hands on the easement first and read it. There's easements that have forest legacy related language. Those are my favorite easements, because not only does forest legacy discuss forest management, it requires it. So there's such a gamut of easement types. Some are super restrictive, and they say you can't touch any of the vegetation on this property. Others are saying you must do forest management in perpetuity, and you have to have a forest stewardship plan. So start with the easement and reach out to Kerry about Green Acres related stuff.
Right, there are also fee simple transfers that you could plan for if you're planning what's going to happen later on, and speak to conservation organizations, private conservation organizations who acquire land in fee, and they often use Green Acres funding to do that. So it's sort of a hybrid situation, but it's another opportunity to consider and to plan. And one of the things I encourage everybody to do is, as we're aging, we want to start thinking about, what will I be able to do in 10 years? What will I be able to do in 20 years? And starting to plan, how will your land be managed if you intend to retain it, or how will you transition the ownership of the land to someone else who can maintain it? So it's a complex set of issues, no doubt about it. There was a question, Andy, about, there are a few questions through the chat and in the Q&A about the bill that we discussed. I'll just briefly say that we're going to be sending out a broader, more detailed communication on that, and that will drill down into it far more. And also, as an organization, we've produced a white paper on Farmland Assessment of Woodlands, which we have been providing to legislators as we meet with them.
Yeah. There's been a couple questions, and there is one in the chat here about, finding a consulting forester. So I'm a consulting forester, but there is a list of consulting foresters who are approved in the state of New Jersey. Some of us focus on North Jersey, some central, some south, some go all over the place. Just get that list and contact a few folks. And I will say that this is a bad time of year to be contacting a forester. The August 1st deadline is in just a couple of weeks when folks are having to submit their annual paperwork. So we're really, as consulting foresters, we're really focused on our current clients, making sure that they have their forms completed and submitted on time. But get on the list, make a phone call, make a couple phone calls, and hopefully you'll track somebody down. I see somebody's in East Amwell. Yeah, just call a forester. Your question is, I like to enhance the forest, propagate native plants. I think stewardship would work best for me. Sounds like it, just on a brief description, sounds like it would be a great fit for your property. But just reach out to somebody on the list, and you can reach out to Jeremy if you're having some foresters are great at calling people back, some aren't. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm neither good nor bad.
It depends on the time of year,
It
right?
depends on the time of year, exactly.
Well, listen, one thing I would add to that, I could imagine, because I receive phone calls this time of year all day long as I'm processing applications for farmland assessment. Oh my gosh, I can't get a hold of my forester. Did he retire? Where is he or she? I've heard that they no longer are providing services. And sometimes the landowner is the last person to find out that is the case, as it pertains to certain approved foresters. So people start getting really scared about their application for farmland assessment. Will I lose my farmland assessment if I don't get it in? The best advice I would have right now, if you are having a hard time getting in touch with a consultant forester right now, 2 weeks before the application deadline, I would say get that application in. Leave the approved forester signature blank. Make a little note on your application, and we're going to send you back a letter of insufficient application. We call it a letter 5 at my agency. And we are going to put basically we're going to get your file, we're going to put it in a separate drawer, and it's going to give you some time. It's going to give you several weeks, if not longer, to kind of secure that person. And that's the document trail that we have given you, that letter of insufficient application, basically saying, we know you're in a pickle right now. We're giving you some time. So do get that application in. Don't just ignore it. Don't wait until after August 1st. Get it in. And yeah, the deadline is coming up really soon.
It is. Yep.
I can imagine there may be a few people in that scenario.
Absolutely. Are plans transferable? Another great question. We get that a lot. So a plan is transferable, yes. So if you develop a plan with a consulting forester for your property, it's a 10-year plan. It goes for 10 years. That plan just has to be transferred to a new owner. That's a good thing. Another question about, am I able to do a timber sale every decade or so with stewardship or woodland? I would just say that's really up to your forest if you're able to do a sale every decade or so. It's less about if you're in stewardship or in woodland management. Either plan would accommodate a timber harvest, but it's really about the forest, your goals. Again, work with your consulting forester, build that plan, and we have customers where they have enough acreage where year 1, we're in an area, maybe we do a small timber harvest. And in year 5, we're on another portion of the property doing a small timber harvest, and we're kind of bouncing around. So some of it probably also depends on the size of your property. So, and the intensity of the harvest that you do.
But there's nothing precluding you from being able to do a timber sale every year if you had the real estate to do so. And we do have landowners that do that under either one of those plan types.
Let's see.
Jeremy, could you address the issue of the forest products in their raw form versus a modified form, and how you evaluate applications when they come in and maybe they're saying, I'll be hyperbolic, I made this chair and the chair sold for $1 million, but it used only $30 worth of wood.
Yeah, that's always a tricky question. But the way I think we always talk about the laws and the way they're written versus the intent of the laws and the rules, right? And the way that woodland management plans work and the way that farmland assessment works is that the taxation department that owns these rules, these sets of rules, they perceive income as active devotion, right? So they don't want to see you take a product from the forest and upgrade it into something that you only have to sell a little bit of, right? So in other words, if you were going to sell a piece of furniture, yeah, you could easily make your $500+ with one little piece of furniture that only required a couple of branches from a tree, possibly. But the concept behind income is that the income needs to come from the raw product, which somewhat forces there to be a certain level of responsible, sustainable management happening in the forest. So as opposed to selling that one piece of furniture, now you're going to have to go out and you're gonna have to possibly select a small handful of trees over perhaps an acre or two on an annual basis. Remove those trees from the growing space, allow for the healthy trees that are trying to come up to kind of take over that space. Work through the herbaceous layer by removing your vines and your invasive species, and take a good look at, what your natural regeneration looks like, and try to foster and do what you can to kind of get regeneration established. So again, income from taxation standpoint is devotion, and that's why we want to see more activity occurring and not just like an upsale of a small wood product.
Yep. We had a couple questions in the chat relative, so this is a little bit different. This is more kind of nuts and bolts of regulations related to forestry activities. So buffers. So someone was asking a question, explain maybe a wetland buffer, riparian zone buffer. Jeremy is the one who pretty much has taught me most of this stuff, so he needs to talk.
Buffer, the word buffer, right, only means a transition area. And a transition area is basically that zone that is around a regulated wetland. The areas that are around other bodies of water in New Jersey would be considered riparian zones, RZs. Those riparian zones are they're based on the classification of that riparian zone. If that water is associated or will eventually within a Huck 14 watershed make it as possibly being clean drinking water for human consumption, then that riparian zone is going to be 300 feet. If the creek or that area, if it harbors threatened or endangered species, or if it's trout production or trout maintenance water, the riparian zone is going to be 150 feet. Everything else is going to be 50 feet. And it's similar with wetlands. The only difference with wetlands is you have exceptional resource wetlands and you have ordinary resource wetlands. In the exceptional resource wetlands, really it depends on if you have a threatened or endangered species that utilizes that wetland habitat to fulfill one or more of its life cycles, right? So you could probably think turtles are an easy one. Sometimes different animals that are threatened or endangered in New Jersey utilize wetlands for forage and habitat. All of that would count as part of like an animal's life cycle. So if that animal is state or federally threatened or endangered, and it utilizes that area of regulated hydrology, specifically the wetland, that wetland buffer / transition area is also 150 feet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that covers it.
Yeah, that totally covers it. So again, when you have a plan, work with your forester. They'll be able to kind of prescribe all that in conjunction with Jeremy's office approving that plan. But that doesn't prohibit you from practicing forest management within those buffers. There's a lot of practices. Think about ash trees. Oodles and oodles of ash trees were growing in a wetland buffer or a riparian zone. And so you're allowed as part of the forestry plan, as long as we prescribe it in the plan, we're going to go into these areas, we're going to salvage ash, whatever it might be. You're allowed to do that. So, but it's got to be in your plan. So that's one thing I would say is if your plan says we're not going to do any activity within the wetland buffer of 150 feet, well, that means you're not going to be working in there. And if you go work in there, technically your plan doesn't allow for that, and technically you're in violation, and you could potentially have an issue with Jeremy's office or the DEP.
Right.
So, more questions about value added. So there was one about maple sap versus maple syrup, a log versus lumber. So my experience in helping customers with the sap question, we value sap. You can go online, you can Google like value of a raw gallon of sap. There's like a market for that. It's generally like 50 cents a gallon. So if I have a landowner who's utilizing sap, raw sap, as part of their justification for farmland, their income, we're going to value the sap at 50 cents a gallon. Obviously, if you boil the sap and make a gallon of syrup, that thing's worth $80 probably a gallon, maybe $100 a gallon. But that's not the figure that you can use on your application, as we talked about. And the same goes for logs versus lumber. You can make all the lumber you want. We would encourage you to do that. We have clients who have lots of clients who have sawmills. It's amazing. But we've got to get back to valuing the log prior to all those inputs being made into that log, making it lumber. And I laugh because firewood is kind of funny to me, because firewood, for some reason, you're allowed to input all kinds of effort into a chunk of wood, and split it up and stack it and season it and sell it for $250 a cord or $300 or whatever it is, and that's okay. But there was a whole heck of a lot of time and energy that went into making that cord. I don't understand that piece of it, but that's just kind of, I think it's been that way for a long time. We've always accepted a cord of wood as being processed and sold and even delivered. Yeah.
And you're never going to have me on your property during one of those 3-year inspections, nitpick,
Right.
how you've derived income. You won't have me or any of my colleagues come to your property and nitpick how you derived income. We're focused on the active devotion to the land through the following of the 10-year activity schedule in your forest stewardship or woodland management plan. So again, yeah, all well and good that you're deriving income through your sap production, but we still want to see how you're managing that sugar bush as a sugar bush. How are you thinning and weeding around it? How are you ensuring that it's going to remain a sugar bush in perpetuity? And what about the rest of your woodland? More likely than not, it's not entirely hard maple or sugar maple. You have other species in there. And, what are you doing about those and the invasives and everything else? So, yeah, the devotion from our perspective, when I say our perspective, I would say the Forest Services and the consultant foresters is how are you adhering to that management plan?
So getting specific to your farmland assessment application, someone asked for clarification on the time frame of activities. So what are we supposed to be communicating on the forms that we are submitting this month for tax year 2026 to qualify for tax year 2026? What are we supposed to be communicating on that form? What's our time frame we're looking at?
Right, you're looking at basically January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2025. And it is weird. It's so confusing. It sometimes even confuses me. We have calendar years, we have tax years. You have your farmland assessment application due on August 1st. Yes, but your activity, we totally understand that you may be placing an activity on your woodland data form for this year that isn't done yet. But you still have several months to get it done, and several of the best months to get it done, right? Because oftentimes spring is wet and challenging, and the summer is too hot, and there's ticks everywhere. And the fall is the prime time to be in your woodland and doing that management activity. So that is very, very common, and totally fine with us.
Yep. The follow-up question was, it's not reported income for the year that just passed. So technically, no. But there's still a lot of people who communicate the money they made in 24 on their application this year for tax year 26. And at the end of the day, most assessors are not going to either know the difference or really care. As long as the income meets the requirement, the assessor is going to be fine. And then from Jeremy's point of view, so long as the activity on the form is matching up with the plan, and as long as on his inspection he finds that the activity in the forest matches the plan and matches the woodland data form, you have nothing to worry about on the forestry side of things. So it all kind of makes sense logically. Just do your plan and you'll usually be okay. So
plan your work your plan. And
Yep.
It kind of goes to that question in the very beginning. How does all of this work, right? And we bounce around all over the place during these presentations. Sometimes we're talking about income, and then we're talking about what if I want to switch plan and is there funding available? But really, like, how does all of this work, right? You're a brand new landowner, and maybe there's a few people on the call that could be potential
Yeah.
brand new landowners. The first, Andy alluded to this, the first call you make is to your tax assessor. The second call you make could either be to me or going on that approved consultant forester list and calling a consultant forester and interviewing a few people, right? You work with that consultant forester, you get your plan written up. It kind of ties in with what your 10-year objectives for the management of your property are. You submit that plan to my office, we approve it, you start doing your management activities, and you start filing your applications. After you file 2 sets of applications and you're in for 2 years, that's when you'll start to notice your tax abatement from taxation, unless you somehow inherited a property that already had farmland assessment intact and in place. But essentially, that's like really the quick and dirty version of how all of this works.
Very good.
I would like to
Rich?
say something about you guys, is that to me, it's amazing how much both of you, from your totally different perspectives, know about the properties under your purview. It's just incredible to me that, like, you can, so that when people work with a forester or even work with you, Jeremy, as the state, it's not just hit and run. It's like, that, what they filed, them. And when oh, last time I was here, I saw this. And somehow both of you guys have managed to sort of do this large scale sort of oversight, but on a very personal basis. So it's a very unique relationship that the landowner has with both the state and with their approved forester. That they're really known. It's an intimate thing. It's not like filing a tax return and nobody knows who you are. So it's a unique experience that for the landowner.
Well, and it's neat for me too, Rich. I really appreciate you saying that. And for me, I think the neatest part of it all is that as an individual woodland owner, you may feel somewhat like, you're isolated and in your own, woodlot bubble, right? But I visit thousands and thousands of landowners. I process just for the North region about 4,000 applications a year. It's wild how many people I remember. And when I see the file come in, I know exactly where that is. And I remember being there. And it is a very personal thing. But what's the neatest part is just to see the landscape level forest management that's occurring in New Jersey because of all of you private woodland owners all doing relatively similar kinds of management that is really responsible, really sustainable. And it truly is. It's the best management happening in New Jersey is happening on the private woodland owner side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would just say, to kind of echo Jeremy and Rich, and I stressed this earlier, but the relational piece of all this is what makes this fun for everybody. So me interacting with my customer, my client, the landowner, but then interacting with Jeremy, interacting with the tax assessor, and all of us kind of working together, appreciating one another's roles. We all have our own role in this process. But at the end of the day, to Jeremy's point, we're caring for and stewarding this precious resource and making a big difference. So it's so rewarding for us as foresters, and I know for Jeremy to go out to a property where a landowner is implementing the plan, doing what the plan says. They're being active, and there's progress being made. There's less invasive species, there's more regeneration, there's whatever it might be. It's very, very rewarding. So thanks for all you landowners on this call who really encourage me as a consulting forester. Just seeing your effort is it's rewarding, and encouraging. All right, Rich, there's an interesting question. We'll kind of put you on the spot here. This will let you kind of hypothesize. Maybe this is actually a friend of mine on here asked this question. Says the proposed legislation for woodland properties seems to be either trying to push people out of the program or into stewardship. What would be the benefit to the state or those pushing the legislation to move woodland owners into stewardship, if that's their motive? Do you think that's their motive, or do you think it's more they don't understand how this works and they're just trying to monkey with this process?
I think that from a general perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, the state's pretty high on the stewardship program and supports it very strongly and does encourage participation. I think it does have benefits to the state in that I think it brings the lands under certain government reporting standards and enables them to gather data differently and report data differently to the government, to the federal government. So I think there is an advantage there. But in this particular legislative case, it has nothing to do with the Forest Service's interests. It's this is purely a political event.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things we're trying to do by this type of a presentation is really convey to our legislators and to everyone out there that whatever you're hearing from people to get sound bites on the web is contrary to what people are doing and the energy they're expending in managing their properties. And that the small amount that they save on farmland assessment, and again, that's not affecting their homes assessment or their buildings assessment or their home site assessment, that small amount that they save never, well, never is a tough word, but virtually never covers the cost of managing your property. Some of you out there may be homeowners. I talk to homeowners almost every day, and they'll tell me, I just had 6 dead ash removed and it cost me $13,000. Well, imagine if you have 1,000 dead ash and you have to remove them as a landowner, forest landowner. So you're absorbing that cost. So I don't think it's understood just what the commitment is by the landowner to the land and the effort. And that's one of the things we're trying to convey here.
Rich, there was a few, this is in the Q&A, and I've seen this in the chat too, and maybe a couple other spots where people are kind of asking for a list maybe of assembly persons, or what can they do to kind of combat this bill moving forward at all? Who do
Sure,
they talk
absolutely.
to? What do they do? Like, what would they do if I were just a landowner? What can I do?
What I do is, the first thing I'd do is I'd wait to get our informational email, which will have a link to the legislative site, which will allow you to look up your respective legislators and communicate with them.
Got it. What types of things, if you had to rattle off 2 or 3 things, if you got your legislator on the phone, what would be your couple of things you'd communicate with them about this bill?
Well, the first thing I convey to them is that the properties that are enrolled in farmland assessment, whether they be woodlands or they be agriculture, there's always people who are not complying, but for the vast, vast majority, they are complying and they are working hard to comply. And it's really a huge commitment to do so. And not only is it a huge commitment, but the alternative of development is very, very interesting to many people. And they're foregoing that alternative. And particularly large lot owners, where you have the ability to create 8, 10, 20 lots and perhaps even do your own construction jobs and whatever it might be, GC them. You're looking at making millions versus saving thousands potentially on tax, which you spend all the time in your effort on the land and the amount of time you spend. And the other thing that's very important to convey is that, particularly for forest lands, is that there are these 2 levels of review, 3 levels of review, actually: the tax assessor, the Forest Service, and the consulting forester, all coming together. So it's not just like, oh, it passed over somebody's desk amongst 1,000 applications. I mean, I tell you, Jeremy could tell you the land. If he's visited it, he can tell you all about it. These are people who they're looking at the properties and they're looking at what's being done, and they know what's not being done. If it's not being done, and they'll tell the landowner to do it. So I think it's important to convey the work you do, and all of the oversight that already exists. And changing a number is just that, changing a number. Are you trying to punish people? Are you trying to drive them out of the program? Yes, they could go to stewardship, but again, I point out to you, if you have a mixed use property, that may not satisfy, it may not take care of the problem, especially if the agricultural number goes to 3,000. And I truly feel bad for the people who run farm stands and go to farmers markets on the weekends and now have to meet that level, because it's going to be very, very difficult for them to continue to do what they do.
I would like to say, I think it's important to note, a lot of questions and comments come in, and everybody that works for the state is associated quickly with, well, the state is proposing this bill. And I want to make sure that people understand the difference between the different agencies and how all of that works. And our agency, the Forest Service, has expressed, significant concern about the reality of what this proposal would bring. We've seen these proposals in the legislation historically. We were hopeful it doesn't go anywhere, and we are on the same page as the Forestry Association in the fact that we don't believe it's really going to do anything meaningful to enhance or to ensure the responsible and sustainable management of New Jersey's woodlands.
Thank you.
Okay. There's some great information in the chat, folks. We're not going to cover it, but there's a lot of questions about where do I buy native plants, get native seed, et cetera, et cetera. There was quite a few quite a few options dropped in the chat. So if that's of interest to you, grab one or two of those names, jot it down. That's where you can find some native material, some planting material. Let's see, what else? There's a question relative to.
Maybe I've seen a couple, seen sort of a side conversation going on about nuts and acorns. And I'm a little worried that people think that the random collecting of nuts from the forest floor as a revenue generation would satisfy revenue under the Farmland Assessment Act.
Right. Yeah. So again, this is like where you differentiate between ag and forestry. So in agriculture, Christmas trees, fruit trees, a pecan tree, whatever that is, any nut producing tree that's grown in a orchard type setting, that is a ag product under on your farmland assessment application. That would be under cropland harvested, just like a cornfield. And you are actively managing that orchard to produce a product. Versus in a forest setting, you could probably make a little bit of an argument that you could manage your forest to produce more nut-bearing trees, having more nut-bearing species, and then possibly managing the forest to encourage nut production of those trees. But sometimes we're trying, but we're really, hoping that this tree is going to do this. There's no guarantee. But a lot of nut collection stuff in the forest is just that. You're just collecting what's naturally happening out there, without any kind of active devotion to making that better. So
Exactly. And there is already, I mean, your assessor is going to deny you based on the means in which you try to, accrue and fulfill your income requirement. And there's already case law that's readily available that precludes people from doing that, because there have been a handful of people trying to forage herbaceous plants and things like that, really doing nothing to enhance their woodland per se through their management, and just going out and foraging what's there and existent. And it doesn't work that way.
Yep. There's a comment here at the end from Elmer, who's part of the association. The nut conversation has afforestation as its endpoint. So as we continue talking about the nuts, there was a lot of conversation about nuts, gathering nuts in here, something about, I don't know. There was other comments, but the idea of collecting nuts and then having some type of a small little nursery and then eventually planting those seedlings in the forest is an awesome idea. Great idea. So if that's what is part of this conversation too, we would absolutely encourage that. The other thing we'd encourage is to protect the seedlings that you plant from the deer, because they're going to get eaten by the deer. So and anybody who's planting trees out there, I would just say, good for you. Keep working at it. It is so difficult to plant trees in the forest and to successfully get them to grow and be there in a decade. We've been doing that on a few properties, including my own family property, and it's a challenge. So that's but as I say, it's a challenge. I may not have ever had as good a feeling as I had this spring when we planted 200 oak saplings that were 6-8 feet tall, and we got them in the ground. And a month or two later, they leafed out. We lost quite a few of them, but it's a pretty rewarding experience. So keep at it. The stewardship plan, that's one of those components that, again, would encourage me to tell somebody, get into stewardship if you're into planting and you have a forest that needs some help. It's the canopy, maybe you had a lot of dying ash, you're controlling your invasives, and now the next step is to begin reforesting that site. And so don't give up. I know it's hard, but don't give up. Yeah.
There's another subject I don't feel like we touched on, and there was a question somewhat associated with fire and forest fire. And I think it connects nicely with, again, advocating for, when people ask, what should I pursue, forest stewardship or woodland management? It was an activity. I began to list a handful of activities that you may be able to do under a forest stewardship plan that you may not be able to conduct that weren't income deriving per se under a woodland management plan. And I think, fire is on a lot of people's hearts and minds right now, especially after the big fire down at Wells Mills and others that seem to be popping up all over the country and, throughout New Jersey too. And I think, whether, primarily under a forest stewardship plan, there's a lot you could do. If you want to do a prescribed burn on your property, it's a challenging endeavor. You'll have to work with primarily the New Jersey Forest Fire Service, but their very first question will be, are you in the Farmland Assessment Program? Do you have a plan in place? And so if you're somebody that's all woodland as an ownership, obviously the only way you're going to be in farmland assessment is through a woodland management or a forest stewardship plan. I'm comfortable as a state forester receiving forest stewardship plans that discuss different kinds of activities associated with fire mitigation. So if your end goal is to at some point have some form of prescribed burn occur on your property, fire access roads are going to need to be in place. Your perimeter is going to need to be pretty well established. You could work on, having fire breaks exist in there. And all of those activities, especially in South and Central New Jersey, where the probability of occurrence is so much higher, those could all be qualifying stewardship activities that would set you up nicely to be able to eventually have a formal RXB conducted by the New Jersey Forest Fire Service. So that, just another one of those non-income deriving activities that could be very, helpful to the long-term health and resilience of your forest.
Absolutely. That's a great one. Yeah. Let's see, Rich, anything else you see that we should touch on?
I'm just scanning through. Was a question, are we working with Farm Bureau? And the answer is yes. We are working with Farm Bureau and with SAF, Society of American Foresters, on these bills. I think you've pretty much gone through everything, Andy. I've looked through, and I mean, some of the questions are interesting, but they're really not farmland assessment questions. And I don't want to turn this into and ask the forester about what trees to plant. So unless you want to go that way.
I mean, I would just say, you could plan a lot of different things. And you learn as you pursue planting, you're going to bump into one of the biggest limitations is availability of product. So, there may be a list of 30 different species you can plant, but good luck finding those 30 different species. So, go to
Well, if you were looking to restore a resilient, sustainable forest in North Jersey, what species would you plant?
I would start with considering climate change, honestly, and how that tree that you're considering planting, by the time it reaches maturity, it could be 30, 40 years from now, right? Even longer. So if you're choosing a species that is already on the southern or, the fringe of its range, right? As much as I love sugar maple, and anecdotally, it's thriving here in New Jersey still. If you were in northern New Jersey and you were asking me if I should invest a lot of money in planting sugar maple, I don't know if I can confidently say it's going to be here in 100 years. And that's sad because I love that tree. But I think that needs to be taken into consideration, the hydrology of your property, rising, global temperatures, where looking at your custom soil resource reports that you may have, or you could, procure through NRCS's web soil survey and figuring out what species work with the soil types you have on your property. Those would all be things that I would take into consideration and then be open-minded, as Andy said, to the fact that certain nurseries are only going to have certain species. So have a handful that you're willing to choose from and protect them from the deer.
Yep.
I mean, really invest. I'd rather see people, plant less and invest more in their tree shelters and the stakes that they use and keeping the brush off of those trees for several years in the beginning than planting 200 trees and only having 5 at the end of it.
Yeah, I would concur with what Jeremy is saying, as far as the, less is more kind of attitude when it comes to tree planting. So be very vigilant, be very detailed when you get the right tree, plant it in the right location, protect it correctly, maintain it, follow up with it. That's what tree planting. I think that's the hardest thing about tree planting is it's not one and done. You don't stick it in the ground and walk away. It's harder than cutting a tree down and splitting a cord of firewood. As far as like it requires you to go back and to go back and to go back again and again and again. And that's hard. I understand it. We own land personally, and it's hard to go back to that same location again and again and again. But that's what it requires. So that's why I'm a big proponent, and Jeremy's saying this, and we talk about this quite often. Rather than planting 100 little seedlings in a acre or half acre or whatever it is, maybe you only plant a dozen. But instead of planting 12-inch tall seedlings from the nursery where 50% are going to die within a month, the minute you drop them in the ground, 50% of them they're going to die in a month. Plant a dozen that you can keep up with, that you can protect correctly. And when I say a dozen, I don't mean plant them this big. Try to get some material that's 2-3 feet tall or even bigger. It's out there. We did some plantings this spring of 6 foot tall white oak, red oak, with root balls that were, it was bare root, but these roots were, 12 inches across, 12 inches deep. And we had to use an auger to plant them. But we have 6-7 foot tall whips in our forest now, and I feel like we're going to have a tree. Like in a couple of years, it's a little tree versus this little seedling that is going to take years and years to advance. And the opportunity for that thing to be eaten or die from drought, whatever it might be, are pretty steep. So that consider that when you're doing plantings. Don't think about as much how many you plant. Think about your survival, where you kind of headed in the long run.
And document everything you do too.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the requirements of the stewardship program. If I come out on one of those 3-year site inspections, and I respect and I totally get that sometimes the best laid plans and the best intentions don't result in success, right? Whether that be the treatment of non-native invasives, especially, when it's a non-professional doing it, or the plant interplanting or afforestation, it's challenging. There's a lot of barriers that are being faced and a lot of challenges to overcome. So if you don't take pictures, if you don't document it, if you don't have some form of proof that you did do it, and I come out and it was a total failure, I'm going to scratch my head and say, what have you been doing under this stewardship plan? I don't see any activity. So make sure you do your monitoring work and you have that documentation readily available at the site inspection. It doesn't take much. I mean, I'm talking about a few sentences associated with dates that activities were done and a handful of pictures snapped.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures, speak 1,000 words, are really helpful.
Could I just point out one question, and then I think I've pretty much exhausted the list, which I think is a good one on farmland assessment. How does it work if you lease your woodland to somebody else? But I'm not going to speak in those terms. How does it work if you lease your cropland to somebody else? Does that get counted? And how does it get counted? Is it the lease value? Is it the product value, since you're not the farmer?
Mm-hmm. I mean, from my experience, we fill out a lot of these applications and we do it differently. So I would say the most common, I'll just go with most common, is there could be a lease agreement between a landowner and a farmer, which is typically a no dollar, whatever you want to call it, kind of barter, essentially, that the farmer comes in, doesn't charge the landowner, doesn't give the landowner anything, and let's say plant some type of crop, whether it's corn or maybe it's just hay. They harvest the hay, and there's an associated value with that crop of hay. So if it's a bale of hay, a square bale of hay, we may be valuing that at $5 to $7 a bale, maybe 4 on the low end, 8 on the high end, depending on if it's first cut, second cut, etc. And then multiply that by the number of bales the farmer took off. He took off 500 bales at $5. That's $2,500 worth of hay came off the land. The landowner didn't get $1 of that. That was the farmer's pay for his work. But the land produced that value. The farmer then produces a receipt that says we removed 500 bales valued at $5 for a total value of $2,500. That would be what you can then put on your farmland application. If the farmer was leasing the land, I I guess there's space for that. We've had that for like a farmer who has beef cows and is just simply using the pasture. We often have had people have some type of a simple lease agreement set up. What that value is, I'm not sure there's a going rate necessarily, whether it's, you know, $10 an acre, $100. I don't really know. I don't see any consistency. So, but I suppose
But I think it's an important thing for the landowner to talk with you about
Mhm.
as the consulting forester is what's their methodology, and to try to be able to at least support the
Mhm.
numbers that they propose to include.
Right. Yep.
And make sure that, you know, that everybody sort of agrees this is a fair measure of the productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's help there too. Like there are some kind of barometers as it relates to the FEC, the Farmland Evaluation
Yep.
Committee, right? So they have things like what's called imputed grazing value. So that gives
Yep,
you a little bit of an
exactly.
idea of what an acre of land is valued at if it's being used as grazing for livestock. So and that's 150 to $200 an acre typically. So
Well, Andy, you and I have in the past looked at those values
Mhm.
under woodlands, and they are mighty low productivity values,
Oh yeah,
which it makes it even harder to understand how these can be raised for woodlands,
Yep.
because the ranges, you know, seem to fall in the roughly $100 an acre range, from what I saw. So they, you know, ranging from depending on where in the state you are, but there's nothing that is in any way going to get a 5-acre person to $1,500. That I can tell you.
Right.
So anyway, I think it's been a great night, and I really appreciate, you know, the chance to work with you guys. You're always fun, and Jeremy, you've done Woodland Stewards many times with us, and Andy, you always step in. You're my co-director of the Forestry Association, and we'd be remiss if we didn't say thank you to you, and also for people out there, thank you for attending. And if you like what we're doing, please support the Forestry Association by joining. We would much appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, anything else you want to say to close?
No, just thank you. Thanks for the opportunity tonight, Rich. It was great seeing you guys and having the opportunity to speak to your membership here, and it was very enjoyable. Thanks for the great questions, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you folks for being on here. Have a great night.
Okay, good night.